Yeah, I mean, look, it's quite hard to overstate quite what this does to US relations, certainly in the Western Hemisphere, where it's put so much of its focus of its foreign policy. This is a sitting president being taken from his capital city, where his security forces should have him essentially impenetrably well guarded and fortified, taken by American special forces, along with his wife. And you can see there the intensity of the military operation. I wouldn't call it enormous, and it doesn't seem like it lasted that long in relative terms, but efficient, significant, and achieving this staggering result for the Trump White House. Unprecedented, frankly, to decide to remove a foreign policy irritant. Yes, the Trump administration have accused him of being a narco terrorist, the kingpin at the helm of two major global drug trafficking rings that they say traffic cocaine and other substances to the United States. But simply to fly in with your special forces into another country run by a rival that is an irritant and take out, take away, capture, and fly to the United States, their sitting president, is an utterly startling moment. It shows, I think, the unbridled confidence with which President Trump at times operates. Some, I think, his critics would call this reckless because at this stage, we don't really know what comes next. We don't know the damage done to Venezuelan civilians during these military operations, and we don't know the risks potentially that follow through perhaps his successor, whoever Maduro's successor may indeed end up being, choosing to be more anti-American, or the possibility of further chaos if we see the criminal groups who the US alleges are so key in Venezuelan society struggle for influence, or we see some kind of wider collapse. So a lot that still has to be answered right now, but be in no mistake, Vic, this is a startling moment. It shows US military supremacy, as I say, the confidence in which this was executed. It seems the efficiency. We don't know the extent of the damage to civilians and other parts of Venezuela here. We don't know what this means for Venezuela's military and political elite. They've stood strong around Maduro for over a decade now. They are clearly going to be in disarray right now. You will have, of course, questions being asked about who really wants that job as the successor, if indeed they too could potentially risk abduction by US special forces in the dead of night. And I think this also sends a signal, perhaps, to US adversaries globally about the strength and decisiveness of Trump's action. We've seen him, when it came to the Iranian nuclear program, act in a way which his predecessors perhaps wouldn't have contemplated. Some, I think, would call that rash, perhaps less concerned about the things you don't know that might happen after you take a strident move, the unknown consequences that can follow. But in this instance, we are now looking at a startling moment where a sitting president of a nation that has been a long-term irritant in US foreign policy in its near abroad has simply been captured and taken to the United States. This is really about an indictment, which we've heard US officials stridently talk about being put before a grand jury in the Southern District of New York about narco terrorism, for which since August there's been a $50 million reward for Maduro's capture or information leading to it. Being no doubt the US thinks it has a convincing criminal case, what's distinctive here is the use of their military to capture and take away an individual and his wife, who they say is a criminal suspect, but he's also the president of another nation with whom the US had a geopolitical beef. That's what's so startling here, as is the fact that we don't really know right now what comes next. And we knew so little about the fact that even was the United States carrying out this extensive military operation until we had a 74-word Truth Social post from the president himself saying that the US was behind it, along with US law enforcement acting with its military. A startling moment here. I think many of us heard these explosions and thought that it might have been the, what many thought, far-fetched notion of US land military action against Venezuela. That was a wild card. What I think few had thought might have even been on the table was the simple notion of using special forces to abduct Maduro and take him to the United States to face what the US says is its own justice system for narco-terrorism charges here. A staggering moment here, and one that I think also shows Maduro's inherent weakness. There was little his armed forces could really do to stop the US coming in and taking him, and that's really their key job. If you can't protect your president in your own capital, what are your security forces for?